Jordan and Gretzky, Serena and Ruth. Remembering great ones is easy to do. But what about the no-names who spent their whole lives long snapping footballs and catching sack flies? They're guys, remember that guy. Remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy. They're just gonna remember some guys now.
Waiting for the snap. Somebody jumps from the Chiefs, gets back. Here's the snap, gets down, the kick is up. It's got the distance, it's good! The Dolphins win! The Dolphins win! Yepremian with a 37-yarder, and the Dolphins are in. Remember that guy, the show where we mine our memories for nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players past and present. Hey there, folks, it is me, one of your hosts, James, joined by someone who, like those 71 Chiefs and Dolphins, is ready to deliver approximately 82 minutes of delightful Christmas time sports fun.
It's going to be great. Fun fact, by the way, my dad once played golf with Garo Yepremian.
Huh? That's pretty cool.
Garo Yepremian.
Was he good? Did your dad beat him?
Garo won, but my dad took a couple holes. Like, they did skins, and like my dad wasn't just giving him money every 18 holes. Like, occasionally he got it back. That was not the pitcher, Edwin Diaz. That was my father, Edwin Diaz. Diaz, the junior, Justin, back with you once again. But we do have a very special guest. And he was but one part of the foursome on that fateful day. Please introduce yourself.
Oh, God. Could you imagine if I was golfing with your dad? Who would be the fourth in that in that grouping?
The fourth is Michael Jordan. The fourth is always Michael Jordan when it's golf foursomes.
Or Bill Murray.
Michael Jordan would have found his way in. He would have tried to say, hey, come on, guys, 50,000 a hole. What are we?
Teenage Michael Jordan.
I'd be like, yeah, Michael Jordan, I'd take that because if I lose, you're getting maybe a tenth of that because that is all I have. But that's right. It's me, the very special guest Xavier, who also golfed with Diaz, his dad, before Diaz was born. Time paradox.
And Xavier, the good news is that's not all you have, because I understand you also have someone that's making memories for you right now.
Oh, God. There is so much that's making memories for me. And I don't even want to get into the Chad Pennington, Teddy Bridgewater high school champions or that insane Woody Johnson article. Instead, James, I have a request, and is you just clip in what I just sent you and just let that roll for a little bit.
Stephen Flow,
It's Stephen Flow!
oh, Stephen Flow.
Yeah, it's pretty fucking good.
So, dear listener, what you have just heard is something that I have listened to maybe 100 times in the past 3 days. There was an amateur wrestling show, and one of the wrestlers has the stage name Stephen Flow. He dressed like Eddie Vedder, carrying a guitar, and
double flanneled it and everything. You gotta double flannel.
Walked into the ring with a parody of Even Flow playing, but it is all just his name. So it's
may I say?
Flow, Stephen Flow, Stephen Flow.
It's the first time I ever understood the words to that song.
It's so beautiful because it is just what, like, the purest distillation of what makes wrestling fun. You know, I had my spiel about Ricky Dozen a couple weeks ago, but, like, this is just true wrestling, and I love it so much. And that's all I care about this week because it's just so great.
I mean, yes, it is wrestling distilled, as you said. It's just, it is a bit that is fully aware that it is a bit, but if you were to ask it if it was a bit, it would get vehement in its denial that it is a bit. That's really what wrestling's all about. Yeah, just a little riff right there. Unfortunately, you know, we've been avoiding it for a few weeks. It's time for me to riff on the Sixers. It is the year. This is the year. It is the year that marks the end of the process. It's done. It's dead. It's gone. It was fun. We had a few second rounds in there. We had an MVP for Joel Embiid. We had a lot of torn ligaments for Joel Embiid. This is the most incredible stat. There have been 51 documented instances of a facial fracture in the history of the NBA.
The ocular fracture stat.
Joel Embiid has 3 of them. Think of all of basketball ever at a professional level in the NBA. Joel Embiid has 7% of the facial fractures in that time. It is unprecedented levels of like, when I had to come to terms with the fact that like his knee is arthritic and it's never going to be like good again. It will be good enough to play some games sometimes. And maybe you'll get lucky and you'll string together 2 months at some point where he doesn't have swelling. But his knee is like, for all intents and purposes, done. I felt bad for him when I realized that was the case. And then for him to get yet another facial fracture. And this is what bothers me, I guess, about the Embiid discourse, is like there is a larger, growing minority subset of the Philadelphia fan base that is like, oh, he's soft, we're never going to win with him, blah, blah, blah. We may never win with him. We will never win with him. I've accepted that. But to peg it on him being soft when, like, literally, like, just before we started recording, word came out, he broke his face 5 days ago. He was already a full participant in practice with a mask. Like, Joel Embiid can be faulted for many things. You can say he's coming to training camp out of shape sometimes, and I would 100% agree with you. I would also agree with anybody that says that the Sixers should not have given him a contract extension before this year, after he had this knee surgery, in which we weren't really sure how he was going to come back. But to label Joel Embiid as soft, and I'm not going to rehash his entire life of all the shit that he's overcome to get to the point that he is. A person who has gone through that and has come through on the other side is anything but soft. But all of this to say, truly the dead horse could not be beat any further when the meniscus injury for Jared McCain comes out. It's just so laughably bad. Like,
the number of times I have thought to myself hearing these, and I am not as invested in the Sixers as you are, but the number of times I, as a relatively neutral fan, have thought to myself, well, surely it can't get any worse for this Sixers team.
Dude, it was literally, so, you know, they had the Ricky the night that Embiid broke his face. Like Spike said at the start of it and at the end of it, he's like, look, the one thing that I just don't want anybody to take from this is don't you dare say that it can't get worse, because it always can. And if you say that it can't, it always will. And then it was the next morning and it was like, oh yeah, well, you know, Jared McCain doesn't have a concussion that we were worried about. He just has a torn meniscus, the severity of which they're still not saying anything about. So like, that's just a thing that's going to be looming over him until we ever see him play basketball again. But
and nothing's ever gone wrong with the Sixers being cagey about a timeline for a lower body injury of a rookie.
It has never once gone wrong against us. It is, you know, it's either a comedy or a tragedy, and I go back and forth on it every day. But the one thing that it definitely is over. It's over. The one thing I have to look forward to is there will be another lottery party. And there hasn't been one in a long time. And I'm just really excited to bring that back.
There could also be, if there's a couple more bad things, open tryouts. You get an invincible situation, Diaz, where, you can take...
would be the team to do it.
Look, I will say this definitively right now. The Delaware Bluecoats have had open tryouts before. If that happens, because like they have to call people up in the Bluecoats and now the Bluecoats need bodies, if that happens, I'll go. I'm 100%. This is a commitment. I'm in.
You're
here first. Damn it.
No, it's brutal. I mean, hey, you're throwing up the white flag with 2 G's?
It would be fun to have the new era be like, look, you've got Maxey, you've got McCain, you've got Cooper Flag, like figure out the rest around the edge.
You've got an aging Embiid as the world's best backup center. What there's the one path to him still being a part of it is taking on a 6-man role as like just the greatest backup center of all time.
His knees cannot handle more than 20 minutes a night. Before those 20 minutes, oh baby.
And it'll only further strengthen his case as the greatest per 36 player of all time.
That is also true. Efficiency is going to be through the roof playing against backup centers. It just sucks, man. It really sucks. But as I said, Embiid, full participant in practice. Maybe it's all going to work this time.
We're back.
No one. No one.
The draft party will be the determinant of whether this has all been a comedy and a tragedy, and I look forward to finding out what it is that we're currently watching.
And just to fill people in on that, so it's the Sixers only keep their pick if it's top 6. So tragedy is that the pick comes in at 12. Comedy is that it comes in at 7 and it goes to the Thunder. If it's 7, it's straight comedy.
Fuck, that's dark, man, but you're also not wrong at all.
I'm very used to it. People ask how I'm so optimistic, and it is because how the fuck else could you get through with this team, man?
Let's talk about something just a little bit lighter. It's bowl season, and I just feel it deserves some amount of time to mention how much better Pop-Tarts is at this than everybody else that has ever been in the bowl sponsor game.
They're running away with it. Tostitos had a nice run there for a little bit with the Fiesta, like just because of the alignment, I guess.
Yeah, that was a very appropriate sponsor for it. But no,
Pop-Tart.
man, fucking Pop-Tarts is just unbelievable, dog. We had the sacrifice of strawberry last year. Do you guys know, between the 3 flavors of wild berry, hot fudge sundae, and cinnamon roll, who won this time to be the one that will be, served up at the altar of the giant toaster and then consumed by the winning team?
It's cinnamon roll.
Before you said any of them, wild berry was what came to mind, so I'm going to say wild berry.
Point goes to Xavier. Cinnamon roll came away with it. I was pretty surprised. I don't know that I've had a cinnamon roll Pop-Tart, and I really enjoy Pop-Tarts. I do try to have any new flavor at least once. I don't think I've had cinnamon roll. Don't particularly like hot fudge sundae. Wild berry would have been the call, but it is going to be cinnamon roll. Also, the winners will get a trophy that is a functioning toaster. It's just they're unbelievably good. I do think maybe that the sports Ouroboros, the Sporoboros, is eating itself a little bit too much, because the other thing that's coming with this is Pop-Tarts has released a promotional line of Pop-Tarts Bowl Pop-Tarts, and that is starting to feel a little bit exhibit, hey dog, I heard you like Pop-Tarts, so I put a Pop-Tart on your Pop-Tart so you can think about Pop-Tarts while you're eating Pop-Tarts. That's not a lie. The Pop-Tarts Bowl Pop-Tarts are just Pop-Tarts with pictures from last year's Pop-Tarts Bowl, or like images that have been printed onto the Pop-Tarts.
I was hoping that it was like football flavored, like whatever their team thought football tastes like is just like their creative vision. That's what I was hoping for.
No, so it is Pop-Tarts with like printed images from the Pop-Tarts Bowl. Now, the fact that strawberry, which is the name of the Pop-Tart that was consumed last year by the winning team, Kansas, I want to say, no, it was the Purple Wildcats, which is Kansas State, correct?
Kansas State, that's what it was.
Yeah, they ate strawberry. But now strawberry is on the images of these Pop-Tarts, and I don't know if that's supposed to be an homage thing. I don't know if the in-house lore, because of the way that they put them into the toasters and say that they love being consumed. Is this supposed to be some kind of saint iconography, Shroud of Turin? Like we're seeing the Virgin Mary in a grilled cheese. We're seeing strawberry on the face of a Pop-Tart. A little bit of the snake eating its own tail, perhaps too much. But again, I just love the Pop-Tarts Bowl, dog. I love this trophy that, how many times is it actually going to get put to use as a toaster? And also, who knows how long this will last? And someday this trophy might mean absolutely nothing. But, speaking about trophies that at some point after being awarded have no real meaning, I want to talk about this week's category with you guys, if you don't mind. Quick plug, I have continued to do that curtain call series that I've mentioned on our RTG dispatch, because I have become fascinated with how do you remember the accomplishments and the records and the highs and lows of teams or leagues that don't even necessarily have the space in which one would honor them. There's so little evidence of some of these things that are written through. It's fascinating every once in a while to find, where did the jerseys for the Houston Comets end up? Where did the retired numbers for the Atlanta Thrashers go? That has been kicking around my head as the dial fell to me this week to select a category. And so today we'll be looking at a similar idea, guys who were MVPs of defunct league. I'm going to start with my league. It's a league you all are probably familiar with. You might call it a league of their own. It is the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, the AAGPBL. while this is familiar, I would, if I had a nickel for every women's pro baseball league operating in the Midwest from the 1940s to the 1950s, have 2 nickels. There was also the National Girls Baseball League, but I bring this up because both of them are kind of a misnomer. At the outset, they are operating with much smaller fields, they're operating with 12-inch balls, and they're operating with underhand pitching, and most of us nowadays would look at that and we refer to that as softball. I am choosing to look at the AAG PBL for this specifically, not just because of the name recognition, but because their version of the sport changed over time. And I don't think there is any better player to illustrate that evolution than maybe the greatest pitcher in AAG PBL history and my guy today, an athlete by the name of Gene Faut.
Not Kit Keller.
Not Kit Kelly, no. None of the players listed in League of Their Own are real people. Many of them have shades of real athletes in their stories, but none of those names are names that unfortunately we will be able to hear this evening. Gene Faut is a native of East Greenville, PA, and she is cursed, much like we are nowadays, to live in interesting times. She's born in 1925, and so she is coming of age during the Great Depression. She was lucky enough that dad maintains pretty steady work at a local auto plant, so doesn't have to leave school to make a living or anything. She's able to go all the way through high school as a standout athlete. She's a track star, a basketball star, a field hockey star. And in 1942, the Great Depression's ending, she's graduated from high school, and the United States is entering into World War II. So once again, her interesting times continue. With that senior year coinciding with the U.S. entry into World War II, like many other women during the war, she finds factory work and is operating in the wartime manufacturing world. Huge female labor opportunity at that time. And even after that, she continues to work in the garment industry all the way up until 1946. In 1946, this is the point of comparison to today, we, lament the reach of women's sports sometimes. We can take a little bit of solace in the fact that in 1946, Gene Faut, pretty big athlete, pretty big fan of sports all around, is unaware of the existence of the AAG PBL for 3 years. But this is the point now in 1946 where she finally finds out about it. So let's take a second ourselves to find out about the AAG PBL. So in 1943, many of Major League Baseball's best and brightest are out there in the war, and the product is suffering. So there are some owners who see a different path. They decide, maybe not necessarily for principled reasons, but at the very least for economic reasons, that what we can do is what all of the rest of the labor forces are doing. We can activate the female population here. We can get women into baseball right now. Number of MLB owners, Branch Rickey of the Dodgers is one, and then the one that everyone knows because he is kind of sent up in a league of their own, the owner of the Chicago Cubs at the time, Philip Wrigley, the gum magnate. They hold open tryouts. About 200 enter, and about 60 are enlisted into the initial 1943 teams. Here's a quick question for you guys. How many teams are there in the movie League of Their Own?
There's 4 in the movie.
That is correct. That is also accurate. And the teams that they have during that season are accurate. Let's see how many you guys can name. I know we can get at least one.
So you got the Rockford Peaches.
Yep, there we go.
You got the Racine Bells.
Racine Bells, yes, very nice.
You got South Bend.
Yes.
Blue Sox?
Well done. That's 3 out of 4.
I ain't getting the 4th.
That's fine. Kenosha Comets is the last one. Well done, Diaz. Fuck yeah.
Thank you. I'll take a C.
So they make up the All-American Girls Baseball League in 43. And actually, at the beginning of 1943, they do call it the AAGSL, softball instead of baseball, but do change it later on. As we said, there is a 12-inch ball. That is the size nowadays of a regulation softball, and it must be delivered underhand. But a big difference between softball and this, there is a mound. The mound is 40 feet from home, so much closer than a baseball game, but there is a mound, and there is also a shorter distance between the bases than we would recognize watching a baseball game, but a slightly longer one than we would see in a softball game today. The biggest similarities are that there is a 9-person lineup, and there is a 9-person defensive alignment instead of more outfielders that you would see in softball. And all of these are pretty accurately depicted by the movie. Another thing that the movie also accurately depicts that distinguishes this from baseball is that the ladies playing are very much being marketed as ladylike taking etiquette classes. They are being marketed as these, glamorous, very ladylike players. That will, along with the rules change. I'm going to just, for ball reasons, mostly try to stick to the rules that affect the play of the game. But what we have starting out here is this halfway mishmash between softball and baseball, definitely leaning closer to the softball side. They had the P for professional in 1944. They also had 2 more teams right away. Now we've got the Milwaukee Chicks, who will later move to Grand Rapids, and the Minneapolis Millerettes, who will eventually become the Fort Wayne Daisies, and will stay at 6 teams into 1946. And now there's a plan to add 2 more, the Muskegon Lassies and the Peoria Red Wings. And so with this expansion, scouts are spreading out because they need to look for more talent, just kind of fill these rosters. And so one scout in Allentown spots Jean playing in a semi-pro baseball game. And that is an important distinction there. Jean Faut never in her life plays softball. It was just not one of her sports. I don't know if there was a softball team in East Greenville High in the 1940s, but she is certainly not on one. She's never played softball. What she did instead was she would pitch batting practice to the baseball team for high school. And she got pretty good at this. Had a couple different arm deliveries she could do, could throw some extra pitches in there, some different pitch types. It's very hard to vary your pitch mix if you're doing underhand delivery. And also just is able to kind of stick around in baseball because she knows all the local people that play baseball from her time with them in high school. So she's continued to play these kind of semi-pro games while working in the garment factory on the side. The baseball games are on the side. The garment factory is your day job. During one of these games on the side, this scout for the AAG PBL recognizes her, says, hey, come to these tryouts. We're having, this big kind of massive influx of players. And so she signs a contract with the now 8-team league. She does not go to one of the new ones, though, because all players are also somewhat being dispersed. She signs with one of the original teams, those South Bend Blue Sox that we mentioned earlier on. 1946 is kind of the AAG PBL equivalent of MLB's 1968 Year of the Pitcher. And a big part of that is because they are starting to do some rule changes to more approximate baseball. They have extended the base paths. The mound distance has been changed a little bit. So for any of the players who at this point have been figuring ways to get more motion on the pitches, that's going to be a big difference. And they have also changed the size of the ball for the first time. It is still larger than a Major League Baseball, but it is now smaller than a softball by about an inch. And all of this leads to a dearth of offense. So we're going to start seeing this kind of golden wave of professional pitchers in this league. But the biggest thing that is going to factor into that is a rule change that doesn't come at the start of that season, but rather midway, when they start to allow sidearm pitching. Not full overhand yet, but sidearm pitching. And now players who had experience doing that and who had worked at that and who knew how to put spin on the ball with those sidearm deliveries, like Jean Faut, are all of a sudden going to have, not to be too cute about it, but an upper hand on the competition. She is not the best offensive player. She'll get better. She will be a much better batter later on, but she, like everyone, has pretty shitty stats on that side of the ball this year. She is also not a particularly good fielding first baseman, but she's a stellar pitcher from the beginning with a 1.32 ERA in her first 12 games pitching once they allow that change in delivery. And going into 1947, they're going to allow sidearm for the whole season. In 44 games, how many innings do you think Jean Faut threw?
What's 44 times 9?
44 times 9 would be 396.
406. 396. Yeah,
396?
Yeah.
That? Okay, well, not quite that impressive. 298 innings, I think, is still pretty damn impressive for Jean Faut. In that, she sports a 1.15 ERA the whole time. So she's pregnant for the last couple months of that season, and she gives birth that offseason, which makes her a little bit late for the start of the 1948 camp. Still manages another 250 innings of 1.44 ERA ball, and in September, she throws her very first career no-hitter. Shortly after 1948, she also has a second child. So if I'm doing the math correctly, she is pregnant for that first ever no-hitter, which I don't believe anyone in Major League Baseball, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think any of those no-hitters have been thrown while the pitcher was pregnant.
I mean, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence.
That's true. This is true. So anyway, this is kind of rare for Jean Faut to be a mother of two in this league. You know, I know we have our Andy Richter character. I can't remember what the little shitty kid is in the movie when he's a kid. He's Andy Richter when he grows up. For the most part, yes, Stewell, yes. You're gonna lose. Anyway, there are not a lot of mothers in the league. With the marketing of this all, they have tended towards mostly having single ladies on these ball teams. And beyond like how the league and the teams treat that also means that the women are like going out all the time and socializing with one another. There is a huge social aspect when you hear veterans of this league talk about what just like the day-to-day life was. They were with these teams all the times, except for someone like Jean Faut. She largely eschews that social stuff because her family is her social life at this point, and baseball is a job to her. I want to make it like super clear. Obviously, you can have a social life and a job that you are very passionate about at the exact same time, but it might offer some reasoning as to why she was so kind of about being in the lab to tinker with her pitching at all times. She was not a part of this social half of the game. She was about pitching all the time. She's doing this job that she is very, very good at. 1949, maybe it is because, again, of all that time getting to train in the lab, this is Jean's first All-Star season, which, the way I've said her stats might be a little surprising, but they only had 3 or 4 All-Star pitchers per year. And there are a lot of good pitchers at this period. For instance, Doris Sams, who's kind of like her chief rival. She, in 1949, is going to capture that MVP award. She's one of only 2 players ever to win 2 MVPs in this league's history. But aside from Sams and Faut, pitching is up because the rules just continue to get closer and closer to baseball. The ball is now 10 inches. The mound is at 72 feet from home plate. And starting in 1948, we are allowing overhand pitching, which again is the main pitching that Jean Faut had done all her life. It is a major change for a lot of the underhanders, and it's a major change for a lot of the batters. It's just a delivery they are not used to seeing. Faut wraps up her 1949 All-Star season with her second career no-hitter on the last day of the season. But in the playoffs, they run into the buzzsaw team of the AAG PBL. Either of you guys got a guess for which franchise it is that just took on all comers and largely came out on top?
Rockford?
You are correct. It is the team they focus on in the movie, even though they don't win in that particular year. The Rockford Peaches are on one at this point. They will eventually go on after that triumph over Fout's Blue Sox to win their 3rd title that year. And in 1950, despite another spectacular season from now 2-time All-Star Jean Faut, the Blue Sox finish 5th in the standings, which makes them the first team out of the playoffs, and Rockford goes on to complete the three-peat for their 4th overall title. In 1951, a new character enters, a new manager for the team, Carl Winch, who had spent the last couple years, in not major leagues, but in professional ball as a player. He's from Allentown, near East Greenville. He's a longtime Phillies minor leaguer, pretty local guy. He is also Mr. Jean Faut. This is her husband that the South Bend Blue Sox have now hired to be her manager. And if you thought Jean felt isolated from her teammates before, now she's the manager's wife, and that's not going to get any better. She also plays a lot less during this time, and like some people have said, maybe this was him trying to act anti-favoritist. She is down 100 innings from 290 in 1950 to only 190 in 1951. But even in these 190 innings, I should mention that she is 133 ERA, a career high 133 Ks to this point, despite this being her career low in innings. Gets her 3rd straight All-Star team, but most importantly, for the purposes of this show, she wins her first ever Player of the Year award, which is the MVP equivalent for the AAG PBL. She does also, I should mention, throw her 3rd no-hitter, which is her first ever perfect game on July 21st against Rockford. And should mention this is the first perfect game and first no-hitter thrown following the changing of the baseball. At this point, we've seen enough of Jean Faut and the Blue Sox in the regular season. What can you do for us in the playoffs? They do make them this year, thankfully. They take care of those Fort Wayne Daisies in the semis, and they set up a clash with, probably guessed it, the Rockford Peaches, who are looking for a 4th straight title in their 4th consecutive trip to the finals. And this is a best-of-5 series. Rockford is seemingly inevitable because they go up 2-0. looks like for all intents and purposes, they're just going to wrap this up and continue to kind of just make this a snooze fest. But no matter what, don't let him get one. And you know who the Game 3 starter for the South Bend Blue Sox is? Motherfucking Jean Faut. This is her only start of the series, but she is the spark that they need. It's a gutsy Game 3 win. Like, she lets a lot of base runners on, but 6 different times she ended the inning on a strikeout with runners on base. Jean Faut is absolutely clutch in this moment. And after that, they complete the reverse sweep eventually to win the first ever title for the South Bend Blue Sox franchise, stunning the Rockford Peaches and the world on their way to that championship. In 1952, she's neither Player of the Year nor an All-Star, but because she gets her 20th win at the end of the year, which ties another player for the most in the league, that along with her 0.93 ERA and 114 strikeouts do earn her first ever pitching triple crown. And in the 1952 finals, hold on to your hats for a second, you're never going to believe this, the Rockford Peaches make it, and so the South Bend Blue Sox take them on for a second time. They lose 2 games, but one of them because a football game was going to be played shortly thereafter, and Rockford had brought in the fences as a result on like a doubleheader day. Eventually, they protested, and AAGPBL's like, yeah, no, you can't fucking do that. So they replay that one. Jean Faut does, in the pivotal Game 3, come in relief to stop the bleeding for another teammate. This will go to a Game 5 after the Blue Sox manage to stave off elimination. They don't need her to play hero in Game 5. They are able to topple Rockford for a second straight season to win their own second consecutive title, becoming only the second team to win 2 consecutive. Unfortunately, by the time we get to 1953, the off-the-field situation is deteriorating, even as the team is experiencing this dramatic success. And that is because that dramatic success really went to Carl Winch's head. He becomes a total piece of shit taskmaster. After winning the 51 title, he ends up winning the 52 title with 12 players because 3 had just walked out on him in protest against his just absolute shitty policies. And unfortunately, while I don't think this is particularly fair, Jean Faut catches a lot of flack from her teammates for kind of being caught in the middle between her shithead husband that is also their boss and the team she's playing with. This does not stop Jean Faut, for the record, from posting another fucking incredible season in 1953. 29 games, 226 innings, 17 wins, 1.51 ERA, and 143 strikeouts, which is good for her second consecutive pitching triple crown. It is good for her 4th All-Star appearance. But once again, for today, for this show, what is most important, it is good for her 2nd Player of the Year award, only other player to ever get 2 Player of the Year awards, along with Doris Sams. And that's not even like the very best part of the season. To put just the perfect bow on this career, on September 3rd, her second to last start of the season, she throws her 4th no-hitter, a second perfect game. She has thrown both of the only perfect games thrown since that ball was changed to its closest to possible size with baseball. So, like, again, not trying to call any of the other accomplishments prior to 1948 illegitimate or anything, but the most legitimate perfect games in this league's history both belong to Jean Faut. And going back, one more plug for the series I'm writing, Curtain Call, about how sometimes people get to know when they're seeing the end of something and appreciate it a little bit more. These fans do know when she throws this perfect game, it's going to be one of her last games. She's announced that she's going to retire after 1953. There's one more game, though, September 6th, 3 days later, and it's basically a Jean Faut appreciation night in South Bend. She has unquestionably been the GOAT of this franchise. Like, they've had some nice hitters, they've had a couple other good pitchers, but Jean Faut is the South Bend Blue Sox, and the fans absolutely love her, but that remains in stark contrast to the relationships that she has with her teammates and with Carl Winch, for what it's worth. She does divorce him eventually. I just want to let everybody know Jean Faut does kick this asshole to the curb in 1968. She doesn't officially say that he is the reason that she's leaving. She doesn't officially say her response with the team's leaving. She wants to go home, have her family. And I won't officially say that Jean Fout's departure is the reason that the AAG-PBL is not able to last. I will point out that the league folds after 1954, their very first season following Fout's retirement. And that is the end of both her career in baseball and, unfortunately, professional women's baseball in the United States to this date. I will just give a brief denouement for her. She dabbles in golf and bowling. Bowling in particular is the one that she's like kind of competitive on the amateur circuit. But baseball remains her legacy, in no small part due to her inclusion in the permanent AAG PBL exhibit that goes up in Cooperstown beginning in 1988. And I think she deserves a place there. You know, she is one of, if not the greatest AAG PBL pitchers ever. And what I think is particularly notable about her, what made me gravitate towards her in particular, was she becomes better as the game comes to more closely resemble baseball. Because Faut was not a softball player. She was a baseball player who became the player she was because baseball specifically was available to her. And she was a player who was at her best when she and women like her were given the closest crack at true professional baseball that they have ever gotten. In our modern interesting times, in contrast to hers, with all of these concerns over who can or should get to play sports, I think that a story that illustrates the possibility of what happens when you let anyone who can play is important. I think Jean Faut is important. Like I said, I think she is one of, if not, fuck pitcher. I think she's one of, if not the greatest players in AAG PBL history. And I know for a fact that even if that's an opinion, one thing that is not an opinion is that Jean Faut is a guy.
Arguably the guy of the AAG PPO. It's a lot of letters to get right now.
It's a lot. I've definitely stumbled over at least once or twice. AAG PBL. Yeah, no. Maybe you would say, if you were a fan of the league, there are other quote-unquote guys. But with us now several decades removed, we do kind of have to go to the cream of the crop for it. And Jean Faut, right there. Doris Sams, respect. But Jean Faut, an absolute stud. My guy. But that is one of three guys that we have today. And I wonder who our next former MVP of former league is that we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, so I'll go next. And as it relates to my guy is not as good of an example of excellence in their league as yours is, James. I did have an option that aligned closer with that. First of all, my sport is basketball. The league is the ABA. The example that I was looking into that was closer to what you're talking about would be the only two-time ABA MVP. The only three-time MVP is Julius Erving. Too good to Guy. The only two-time MVP in the history of the league is a man by the name of Mel Daniels, who is worthy of a deep dive if he may get in another. Some of the headline items. What makes him particularly interesting is after his ABA career, he only played 11 games in the NBA. So one of those guys that can be easily forgotten. He was a vicious rebounder for his time. He averaged over 15 a game for his ABA career. And he also had two great quotes that just kind of illustrated the type of player he was. Quote number one, when you went up for a rebound, you went up with your elbows out. And quote number two, when talking about the rules and the regulations in place for the ABA, quote, when I played, the fine for a fight was $25. Nobody is going to avoid a fight over $25.
I was going to say a Reggie Evans type, but Reggie Evans didn't really have that fighting edge to him.
Yeah, not that fighting edge. And also, I mean, the fact that like Mel Daniels still did also average like 20 a game. And again, was good enough to be the MVP, good enough to be a two-time MVP. So if Reggie Evans had skill, he could have been Mel Daniels. But alas, he didn't. He wasn't. But nor is Mel Daniels my guy this week. Reggie Evans has that as an edge over Mel. My guy this week. First of all, it was a revelation. I'd known this guy for years, decades before, but I never knew that he actually played in the ABA when I was going over the list until I saw not only did he play in the ABA, he was actually an MVP of the ABA. And the other thing that made me steer towards this category is I was reminded of a conversation that we recently had in the Discord, which is who is the greatest coach who was also a great player in the history of basketball? The consensus we fell on was Dawn Staley, and it's very hard to argue against that. I wouldn't even necessarily say the guy I'm bringing up is ahead of Dawn Staley, because when we talk about captaining the Olympic team, turning South Carolina into such a dynasty, it's hard to match those accolades on both sides. I had brought up Larry Bird, obviously an incredible player. For 3 years, a great coach for the Pacers, but only for those 3 years. Maybe doesn't have the longevity to hold up. But when it comes to my guy, We're talking about the guy who, when he retired from coaching on the sidelines, had the best winning percentage in the history of the NBA. He's since only been surpassed by Phil Jackson. As a player, he was a 4-time All-Star, a 3-time first-team All-NBA. He was an NBA champion as both a player and a coach for the only team that he ever represented while in the NBA. But we're not talking about the NBA quite yet. We're talking about the ABA. And we're going to talk about my guy this week, the Kangaroo Kid, Billy Cunningham.
Billy Cunningham. Billy Cunningham won an ABA MVP award.
He did. And the story of how he got to the ABA is interesting in and of itself, and we'll get there. To begin, William John Cunningham was born June 3rd, 1943 in New York, New York. His father, John, was a World War II veteran who came home to serve in the FDNY, and through promotions, by the time he retired, he was the assistant chief of the entire FDNY. So, pretty accomplished man there in and of himself.
He really climbed the ladder there.
Kept on climbing and, put out some fires along the way.
I'll see myself out.
On Billy Cunningham's 5th birthday, John got him a basketball as a gift. And when he reflects on this, Billy remembers immediately running to the hoop at his grammar school that was 3 blocks away, just getting up shots immediately. He said, quote, "I lived there that summer. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there was just something about the game. I loved it instantly." While he was quite the player, he became a bit of a playground legend, in particular because of his incredible jumping ability. He's just this scraggly, skinny white kid who can outjump anybody, outjump the grown men that come to play, and that's where the Kangaroo Kid comes from. I wish there was some kind of Australian connection that maybe would have been a little cooler, but it's just very literal. He jumps high. Let's call him a kangaroo. By the time he got to high school, again, he became a playground legend, so expectations are pretty high for him in the ultra-competitive New York City high school basketball scene when he gets there. And by all accounts, he 100% delivers. Plays for Erasmus Hall in the Brooklyn League, and he's named the league MVP as a senior in 1961. Also for that season, Erasmus went undefeated for the regular season and then ran the table in the postseason to claim the city championship. He was named first team All-NYC after his senior year, and he's also named the first team All-American by Parade. And again, largely due to his incredible rebounding prowess, while only measuring in at a tall for normal but not tall for basketball 6'6". When it came to his college recruitment, there was very little drama. The head coach of UNC was a man by the name of Frank McGuire, and Frank McGuire's sister happened to be next door neighbors with the Cunninghams growing up. So he spent 18 years hearing the legend of this scrawny kid. It's a trusted family friend. It's just really no doubt Billy Cunningham is going to go to UNC and he's going to play basketball. By the time Billy made it down to Chapel Hill, though, there's a bit of a problem. McGuire had been forced to resign due to an NCAA scandal that alleged that he paid for the lodging and food for the parents of his players during the Dixie Classic, which was a basketball tournament held at the 4 big schools in North Carolina: Duke, UNC, NC State, Wake Forest. He paid for people to have roofs over their head and to have food on their plate, and the NCAA just does not stand by those values. So they launch an investigation and they force him out. He's forced to step down. UNC doesn't really know where to go, but they decide that they're going to turn the program over to the young upstart assistant, Dean Smith. Just one last note on Frank McGuire because it's interesting. He was immediately hired as the head coach of the Philadelphia Warriors, and he was the man on the sidelines for that fateful afternoon in Hershey, Pennsylvania, when Wilt Chamberlain scored 100 points against the Knicks. He was only the coach for that one season, though, because if you know your basketball history, you know that the year after that, the Warriors moved out west, become the San Francisco Warriors, and Frank McGuire was not all about that. He didn't want to move coast. He'd been an East Coast man his whole life, so just has that 1 year, that brush with Wilt. But back to Dean Smith. Dean Smith's first impression of Billy Cunningham was, what did Frank leave me with here? This is a very skinny kid. Dean Smith said he could barely even walk, like he was falling over trying to walk. How am I supposed to expect this guy to be able to play basketball? He described him as having a, quote, pigeon-toed gait, which doesn't really sound like a compliment.
It's all like one of the most old-fashioned insults I could possibly imagine.
I mean, just using the word gait, period. Like, criticizing somebody's gait is very, very old school in that way.
That and the fact that this guy went to something called a grammar school. Those are the two most clear us as old-fashioned things.
Right, exactly. We're back in the late 50s, early 60s. You know, these are the words we used. But back then, you know, people didn't play as freshmen. So Billy Cunningham had that whole freshman year to prove himself in practice, to show what kind of player he could be. By the time he gets to his sophomore year, he's already a starter. His impact is immediate. And in a non-statistical sense, the reason why Billy Cunningham gets so much playing time as a sophomore, not only is he this person who's able to jump high and get rebounds, he's also just known as ferocious on the court. He's going to fight for every rebound. If the ball gets on the floor, he's going to be the first one to dive on it. First guy in, last guy out, real gym rat, coach's son, all that stuff. That's
Coach's
Billy
neighbor,
Cunningham.
I guess.
Coach's neighbor's son, exactly. He's hustle and grit personified. That's not to say that he's some unskilled hack out there. He puts together quite a few impressive games and quite a few impressive seasons while at UNC. First of all, in his senior year, he scores 48 in a game against Tulane, which set the UNC program record. It was eclipsed the following season by Bobby Lewis, who put up 49. But those 48 points against Tulane still remain the second highest total in the history of UNC. And when we consider that guys like Michael Jordan, Vince Carter, among others, went through there, pretty impressive to still have that scoring record. In that same game where he scored 48 points, he had 25 rebounds, which gave him the only 40-20 game in the history of UNC. You might think 25 rebounds is a lot. It might be the most he ever had. He had 5 different games while playing at UNC where he had at least 25 rebounds, which included a program record 28 against Maryland as a senior. This again would be eclipsed just a couple years later by a guy named Rusty Clark. Great name. But Billy still has the second best mark for a single game in UNC history. He set the career record for rebounds with 1,062, and it's since been surpassed by guys like Armando Bacot, Tyler Hansbrough, Sam Perkins. Even former Sixer George Lynch was able to get past that, but important to note, all of those guys did so in at least 4 years of playing, and in Armando Bacot's case, it was in 5 years. Among 3-year players, Billy Cunningham still has the career record at UNC. This I discovered just by doing a Control F on the UNC record book. Billy Cunningham's name appears 390 times in the UNC all-time record book.
God damn.
Right. And obviously that's not all, 390 records he holds, but the dude's name shows up 390 times in their record book. That's pretty impressive. The only player in UNC history to average a double-double in each season that they played at UNC. His senior year, he was a team captain. He was named the ACC Player of the Year, and he was named First Team All-American. All of those stats are great, but just one more thing to show the kind of character that Billy Cunningham has. UNC fans were very non-receptive / disappointed in Dean Smith in his early years. They didn't make an NIT or an NCAA tournament during the 3 years that Billy's playing there. And during his senior year, the frustrations boiled over, and the UNC fans do what everybody in the South does when they're very angry at a person. They create an effigy of him and hang him. And
well, most of the time they create an effigy of him before doing the second
Of course.
part.
It is better than what sometimes they will do. It was at least an effigy, but they're hanging the effigy, and Billy Cunningham is irate, rips down the effigy, scolds the fans, says, look, we're the players. We lost the game. Coach is doing the best that he can. You guys need to have some faith in Coach. And, while it never materialized while Billy was playing at UNC, he did turn out to be right in coming to Dean Smith's defense. Worked out pretty well. After he graduates, he enters into the NBA draft, and he goes 8th in the 1965 NBA draft, which notably, it was the last one to feature the territorial picks. So there were 3 territorial picks. And then when you get to the actual player order, he went 5th, but technically he's the 8th player off the board.
Bill Bradley was one of those 3 territorial picks in the last territorial draft, I believe.
He was. Yeah, 1965 went to the Knicks. couple other interesting names in that draft class. Billy Cunningham went 3 spots behind Rick Barry in that same draft.
Okay.
And 1 spot behind Utah Jazz legendary coach Jerry Sloan.
Okay, so we got a couple good coaching pickups in this draft.
I think the Von Arsdale twins went back-to-back
They did.
in that draft, too, which I always thought was hilarious. Imagine being the twin brother who goes first, and you always have that over your brother.
I imagine it's like the twin that was born first is able to hold that, except like just so much better. Yeah, the Arsdales go in that draft. Billy Cunningham goes in that draft, and he's drafted by the Philadelphia 76ers. He arrives to Philadelphia already a ready-made contributor. Not quite ready to be a starter, but he settles into that 6th man role. He leads the league in games played as a rookie when he plays in 80 games. 14.3 points, 7.5 boards across 27 minutes a night. Sixers finished first in the East for the regular season. They earn a bye directly to the Eastern Conference Finals in the previous format. And they lose to the Celtics in 5 games, 3-2, as is history, as is tradition for the Sixers. And the Celtics win the finals that year over the Lakers. For his season, Billy Cunningham is named to the first team all-rookie team alongside Rick Barry, Fred Hetzel, and both of the brothers Van Arsdale. The following season, Billy Cunningham continues to excel in his 6th man role, and the Sixers added a center by the name of Wilt Chamberlain. Came over from the then San Francisco Warriors, came back home to Philadelphia, and they assembled one of the greatest teams in NBA history. The 66-67 Sixers put up 68 wins. Billy Cunningham averages 18.5 points along the way, steps it up to 20 points a game in the NBA Finals when the Sixers beat those Warriors in 6 to claim their first title since relocation from Syracuse.
You know my favorite person on that team?
Who's that?
Wally Jones.
Of course. How could I forget? We love revisiting those 67 Sixers. We'll go ahead 2 years to the 68-69 nice Sixers because that's the first year that Billy Cunningham is a starter. His production leaps up commensurate with what you would expect. Plays 41 minutes a night, and again, as a 6'6", like small forward that can sometimes play up to power forward. He averages 25 points and 13 rebounds and leads the Sixers to the 2 seed. Billy Cunningham is also going to receive his first All-NBA honor that year. He's voted to the first team, and he also finishes 3rd in MVP voting for the 69 season. Willis Reed finished 2nd. Wes Unseld won MVP for that year. With all of that production in his first year as a starter, not only does he have more eyeballs on him across the NBA, he also has some eyeballs on him from the competitor that's forming, the ABA. And on the basis of that, Billy is able to pit the Sixers and the Carolina Cougars against each other. And what he eventually settles on is that he does sign a contract with the Carolina Cougars. However, because he's a man of his word, he's going to play out the last 2 years on his Philadelphia contract, and then he's going to go play for the Carolina Cougars. And this is where it gets a little interesting as to how he ends up with the ABA. When Billy Cunningham signed his contract with the Cougars, it also included a $125,000 signing bonus. $40,000 of that was to be paid upfront, which it was. The remaining balance was to be paid 1 year from then, still 1 year before he actually plays a game, but those were the terms of the contract. When he did not receive the $80,000 and the Carolina Cougars made it clear they had no intention of paying it, he took that as a breach of contract and instead signed a 4-year, $950,000 extension with the Sixers. And this is where we get into all the legal stuff that Xavier understands way better than me. So I'm just going to say words that don't really mean much to me, but they're the words that the legal process uses. The Cougars filed for an injunction, for which proceedings took a year, and ultimately the U.S. District Court denied the injunction. However, 8 months later, the U.S. Court of Appeals would issue a reversal, which obligated Billy to report to Carolina. Very legal, very legalese, and a lot of stuff that I don't understand. But in layman's terms, Cougars didn't pay Billy Cunningham. Billy Cunningham says, I'm going to go play for the Sixers. Cougars said, hey, you can't do that. And the first court said, Cougars, you're wrong. And then the second court said, Cougars, you're right. And then when we're at that point, Billy Cunningham did technically still have more avenues of appeal, but at the end of the day, he's just about ball. He wants to get out there and hoop. So he drops his remaining legal avenues and agrees to play the next 2 seasons for the Cougars.
I read the lawsuit, the Billy Cunningham lawsuit, because thankfully it was linked in Wikipedia.
Love it.
I'm going to give the 30-second spiel. He came to an oral agreement with the Cougars where the Cougars were going to pay him a certain amount if he decided to play with them, including a signing bonus of $125,000, $45,000 up front, $80,000 if he decided not to play for the Sixers that year. So no matter what, he was going to get $45K, even if he decided he was going to play for the Sixers anyway. He came to an agreement with the Sixers, but never actually signed it. But because he came to an agreement with the Sixers, they're like, we're not going to pay you the extra $80K because you elected to play for the Sixers. And he said, no, I want the $80K. You've breached your contract with me, and now I can't sign a good contract with the Sixers because of it. And they said, what the hell are you talking about? So in the lawsuit, this is during the reserve clause era where contracts just roll over, the court decided that he can't have both things. Like, if he wanted the $80,000, then he had to have not elected to play for the Sixers, in which case he has a valid contract with Carolina. So if that's what he wants, then he's got to play for the Cougars. Pack your bags, you're going to Carolina. You get your signing bonus. You're not in the NBA now.
Okay, I mean, I think we've made it clear. Billy Cunningham excelled on one court and probably didn't know what he was talking about. Probably didn't know what he was talking about in the other one. But when he arrives to play for the Carolina Cougars, they've been mid at best in their history in the ABA. There's been 3 seasons played so far. In the inaugural one, they went 500, barely snuck into the playoffs and got swept out in the first round. The next year after that, they went 34-50, missed the playoffs. The year after that, 35-49, missed the playoffs. So not looking great for the Carolina Cougars, but hopefully the Kangaroo Kid can hop on over, change a few things. They go leaping up the league standings once he arrives. 57-27, which is good enough to finish first in the East. Billy Cunningham averages 24 points and 12 boards a game while playing for head coach and former UNC teammate of his, Larry Brown. So he has that offensive production, 24 points, 12 rebounds. He also leads the league with 2.6 steals per game. And when you put that all together, you've got an easy choice for the ABA MVP for that season, Billy Cunningham. They make it to the East Finals, where they go against the Kentucky Colonels and Louis Dampier. It's a thriller. It goes to 7 games, but it is ultimately the Colonels that prevail. They win it in 7. On the other end of the spectrum, so when we're considering the impact of Billy Cunningham, we have this team that went from missing the playoffs to finishing first overall in the East. On the other side, we have a Sixers team that has been a consistent playoff contender, consistently, near the top of the East. And granted, there were other players that left. Will Chamberlain was no longer playing, yada, yada, yada. Just 3 years removed from the championship, and in their first year without Billy Cunningham, the Sixers went 9-73, which is still the worst record in NBA history for a team in an 82-game season. That's in just 1 season of not having Billy Cunningham.
I would argue if that's the case, he should also win the NBA MVP award.
When taken at a literal face value, the player that presents the most value to their team, there's a pretty strong case to be made. I would agree. He plays the 2 seasons for the Cougars, though, and in that second year, they finish 3rd in the East. They get a first-round series with the Colonels, and again, they lose. But with his contract expired, Billy Cunningham has satisfied his obligation. He owes nothing to the Carolina Cougars. He never wanted to leave Philadelphia, so he's going to go back home. When he gets there, the Sixers are still toiling. They went 25-57 the following year, so still well out of the playoffs. And with the addition of Billy back to the fold, they improved by 9 games to 34-48, which in the modern NBA gets you in the play-in rounds, but back then was still not good enough to get in. In his second year back for the Sixers, they're starting to look like a contender again. 20 games into the season, they're 14-6. They've just beaten the Knicks to extend their current winning streak to 3 games. But in that same game against the Knicks, according to Billy Cunningham, his knee, quote, exploded.
Succinct.
it very succinct. We didn't have ACL, MCL, meniscus, LCL, all that back then, but we did have exploded. And, suffice to say, he suffered extensive ligament damage, and he would later admit that he was actually glad that the injury happened because he was starting to get up there in age. He's in his mid-30s, and when a lot of athletes have to struggle for a couple years debating, is it time, should I retire? Billy Cunningham's knee made the decision for him. It made it pretty easy.
We didn't have ACL, MCL, UCL, any of those, and neither did Billy Cunningham anymore.
He had none of them. So his playing career is pretty quickly done. But Billy Cunningham, again, since he was 5 years old, since he got that birthday gift, basketball has been his life. And he's not going to stray far from the game. He is almost immediately hired by the NBA on CBS to serve as their lead color commentator alongside Brent Musburger. The Sixers continue that upward trajectory that they were already on when he unfortunately had his knee injury. They go to the NBA Finals. They go up 2-0 on the Blazers. They lose 4 straight. Bill Walton gets his NBA Finals MVP. The Sixers lose. It's what we're known for. It's what we do. But coming off of that, the expectations for the Sixers are pretty high. So when they start the next season 2-4, it's a big cause for concern in Philadelphia. With that being the case, they fire their head coach. Gene Shue just led the team to the finals, but they started 2-4. We have this incredible core in place. We can't waste any more time. We need to get Gene Shue out of here. Shue away. Get him out.
Did the Inquirer ever do a stupid headline like that?
Well, so the Inquirer usually
What's
a
the
paper
Philly version of the New York Post, I guess, is really what we're getting at.
Philly Daily News.
Okay.
The Daily News, yeah. Although I will say Daily News is still very left-leaning as compared to the New York Post. But you're looking for your, forced pun insult headline.
Yeah.
Daily News is where you're going for that.
Pre-Rupert Murdoch New York Post is Philly Daily News. Got it.
Exactly. But, the Sixers make that change. They fire Gene Shue, and they go to the locker room, and they say, well, who would be the next great head coach for you to have? And they all say, well, shit, we respected Billy a hell of a lot more than we ever respected Gene. Why don't we bring in Billy Cunningham to be the head coach? And so just 1 year removed from his devastating knee injury, the Sixers turned the keys over to Billy Cunningham, who had never coached basketball at any level and had just been a commentator. So what we're really talking about here is 70s JJ Redick, except he was actually really great at basketball.
Yeah, I guess JJ Redick's still the best NBA podcaster. That's pretty fucking great.
It's right up there. And JJ Redick never got a loose ball in his life. Billy Cunningham knows all aspects of basketball. He has the respect of all of his teammates who are now his players because he is now the head coach. And one thing that kind of shows, and again, I'm willing to concede Billy Cunningham doesn't know what he's talking about in the court of law. But when it comes to a basketball court, he is incredibly ahead of his time because his first act as head coach is to hire his lead assistant, who was the then head coach of the Penn Quakers, Chuck Daly, who, of course, goes on to be the head coach for the Bad Boy Pistons, the head coach for the 92 Dream Team. And he hired Chuck for 2 reasons. First of all, Chuck's Penn Quakers teams had a reputation for hard-nosed defense, going against the other giants of Philadelphia, Villanova, St. Joe's Temple, all these teams that should on paper be better. Penn is, for some reason, always very competitive. And it's on the basis of their defense. And it's also on the basis of, we're talking about Penn. We're talking about the Ivy League. We're talking about nerds. This Penn basketball team was the first team to have its own head of analytics. And when Billy Cunningham hires over Chuck Daly, he also brings over the head of analytics for Penn basketball, Stu Suss, who then becomes the first analytics person on a coaching staff in the NBA. When it starts, first of all, it's important to say, Billy Cunningham inherited a team that had just been to the NBA Finals. That is part of the context of the stats that I'm about to give. But when Billy Cunningham took over, he became the fastest coach in NBA history to 200 wins, the fastest to 300 wins, and the fastest to 400 wins. The only person that beat him to those marks since then is Steve Kerr, who, again, is an all-time great coach who inherited a pretty good situation. In his first 4 years as head coach of the Philadelphia 76ers, they go to the finals 3 times. They lose in 1980 to the Lakers. They lose in 1982 to the Lakers. But it is that third time around. They add Moses Malone to the fold. They have another ferocious rebounder like they had when they had Billy. And they have that infamous faux run that actually turned into faux 5-0. But the Sixers cruise through the NBA playoffs and they sweep the Lakers in the 83 finals to win their second and still only other championship in Philadelphia. So we have 55 at the Syracuse Nationals. Personally, feels gross to me to claim that as part of the Philadelphia 76ers history. So realistically, we have 2 championships that we've ever won. And it comes in 67 with Billy Cunningham leading the charge as the 6th man. And it comes in 83 with a still very young, only just reaching his early 40s, Billy Cunningham patrolling the sidelines. And if you're a Philadelphia 76ers fan, at this point you're thinking, we've got it made. Billy Cunningham is young, in his prime. He has at least another good 20, 30 years as a head coach. We're going to ride this as long as it can go. When it gets to the 84-85 season, he leads the Sixers to the Eastern Conference Finals again, which he did 6 times in his 8 years up to that point as the head coach. But despite the addition of a young rookie Charles Barkley to the team, they lose in 5 to the Celtics. And at only 42 years old, with the trajectory of the team still looking up, Billy Cunningham decides to retire as a coach. Never again coaches in the NBA. But he's not done with basketball. A few years later, an old friend from Brooklyn and the former CEO of the New Jersey Nets, Lou Schafel, reaches out to him. And he has an idea. We live in Miami now. This is a great market. It's burgeoning. Why don't we reach out to David Stern and try to bring the NBA to Miami? So they go to David Stern, and he gives them their blessing to go out and seek funding. Billy Cunningham and Lou Schafel put up 40%. They get the remaining 60% from Ted Arison, and the Miami Heat come to be. Obviously, they struggle in those early years, but 6 years later, Billy Cunningham and Lou both sell their share to Ted's son, Mickey, who Mickey Arison is now the entire owner. I was going to say majority. I don't know how to say that. 100%. The sole proprietor of the Miami Heat. I think that works. But when they sold, they doubled their investment. They put in $30 million at the start. They sell their share for $60 million. And I mean, you look at what the Miami Heat franchise has become today. It's not one of the prestige franchises, but it is certainly one of the destinations, one of the top organizations in the league today. And it was Billy Cunningham's vision that said, why don't we put basketball in this market? It's begging for it. As it relates to this category on the whole, Billy Cunningham would never have been eligible if he had it his way. But if you watched him on the court, you knew that once the ball went up, that was all he was about. He was an incredibly passionate player, and he was undeniable at every level. When he played in high school, he goes undefeated his senior year, first team All-American, wins the city championship. When he goes to UNC, this is still a fledgling UNC program at that time, he was Dean Smith's first real star, helps to put the program on the map, and for that, his number 32 still hangs in the rafters at UNC. His number 32 also hangs in the rafters at Wells Fargo Center, where his number is retired. He is a major part, maybe the most important part of both of the titles that the Sixers have won while being in Philadelphia. And as we went over earlier, probably the only 2 titles we're ever going to win. So when it comes to the Sixers and we talk about the all-time greats of the Sixers, the same names always come up. Iverson, Dr. J. You can still argue Embiid in the modern context. Charles Barkley. You can go back to Wilt Chamberlain. But when we look at it holistically, I think the greatest Sixer of all time has to be Billy Cunningham. And when it comes to the ABA, his brief little cameo, I think, certainly makes him a guy of the ABA. You could easily forget
make him a good guy of the ABA. That's a good point.
Specifically of the ABA. When it relates to the Sixers franchise, too good to guy, too great to guy. Although I would say, just being a Sixers fan, like, people don't talk about Billy Cunningham enough when they talk about this franchise. Like, World B. Free is probably better remembered among Sixers fans than Billy Cunningham. And that's just because his name is World Be Free. Like, it's a cool name. But I wanted to just take this opportunity, once I realized I had it, to reflect fondly on certainly the most accomplished Sixer of all time and one of the guys of the ABA, Billy Cunningham.
Though responsible for everything bad that the Miami Heat have ever done.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Not only did he sell too early, where he missed out on $1 billion, but also he's responsible for LeBron, Chris Bosh, and D Wade happening.
I will say it felt pretty good as a Spurs fan to be the reason that core broke up, though, and I do owe him for that.
Yeah, I mean, not all team owners can be whoever those guys were for the St. Louis team that did the TV contract.
Yeah, the fucking geniuses.
Yeah, those guys are
what
great.
A deal.
But those guys are not the guys that we still need to remember this week. We do have one more to remember, and I'm excited to see what you brought to the table, X.
I'm very excited to talk about this, too. My guy's a little more international. We got a bit of a European flavor, because today I want to tell you all about the Lord of all indoors, Slaviša or Steve Žungul.
Žungul? How does one spell Žungul?
Zungul.
That starting with a Z blew me away.
Yes.
Okay, what Eastern European nation are we going to for this then?
In the heart of Europe, a nation stood strong, Yugoslavia.
Steve was born on July 28th, 1954 in Požarevac in the People's Republic of Serbia in what was then Yugoslavia. After his father died when he was an infant, his mother remarried. The family moved to Kastel Luksic, which is near Split, also in Yugoslavia, but what is in now Croatia. So going to a different constituency, but still Yugoslavian. Like many, he was a soccer player. And when he was a teenager, he makes his professional debut for his local team, Hajduk Split, in the Yugoslav First League. As a 19-year-old, Steve helps lead Hajduk the league title in the 73-74 season over Velez of Bosnia. They win on goal difference. And leading the line, Steve led the team with 12 goals. So this is their first title in a couple of years. And they win solely based on goal difference, and it's thanks to starting a teenager up front. Over the next couple of years, he's just going to continue to excel with Hajduk. This is their golden era, and a lot of it is due to Steve. The team wins 3 league titles, 4 Yugoslav Cups. Steve scored in both legs of the 73 final win against Red Star Belgrade, and in extra time of the 77 final against Budućnost. And they also had some of their best European results in history. They made the quarterfinals of the Champions League in 1976, losing to PSV. They made the semifinals of the Cup Winners' Cup in 1973. During that Champions League run, Steve scored a hat-trick against Floriana. He scored home and away against Molenbeek, and he finished the second leading scorer for the entire competition. Which, that's not something that would be a foreign concept now to any team from Croatia or things like that. But at this point, they were really good. And because of, Steve's prowess at the club level, he also played pretty frequently for Yugoslavia. He earned 14 caps, and he was the youngest player on their Euro 76 squad. So for those who don't know, at that point, the Euros was only 4 teams. Like, the tournament itself was essentially the qualification to get to the last 4, and then the last 4 was just a straight 2-game knockout tournament.
So that's the only part that was, considered the Euros, and now
Yes.
everything that we would think of it. It's as if March Madness was just the Final Four, but
Yes,
there were still
exactly.
March Madness games playing up to that.
And Euro 76 was fascinating because that's the year that Czechoslovakia wins on penalties due to Antonin Panenka inventing
Ooh.
Panenka.
So this features 2 defunct countries, you're saying, Euro 76.
It features 3 defunct countries.
What's the third? The USSR?
Czechoslovakia beat West Germany in the final. The only country from this tournament that still exists is the Netherlands.
Yeah, for now. Keep one eye open, Netherlands.
Yeah, so Steve was 21 for that tournament. By far the youngest player on the team. International football, very much a more experienced area. And by the late 70s, teams all over the world were trying to get Steve to sign up with them. AC Milan apparently wanted to make him like one of the highest paid players in the world. France Football declared that he was one of the 6 best forwards in the world. But the problem was that in Yugoslavia, players could not transfer out of the country until they had turned 28 and also completed 18 months of mandatory military service. Quote, he was the king of goal scorers, said Vladimir Bera, a compatriot who was considered one of the best goalkeepers in the world in the 1950s and then was briefly an assistant at Hajduk. Everything Gerd Muller, who considered one of the greatest forwards of all time, could do for Bayern, Žungul could do for Hajduk. He just knew where the ball was going to go and could always stay a few moves ahead of everyone else. That's something you can't be taught. You need to be born with it. So Steve, absolutely dominating in Yugoslavia, in the Yugoslav First League. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, the Yugoslav First League definitely doesn't exist anymore. So, he must have won MVP in the Yugoslav League, right? They did not have MVPs at that point. There was no player of the season. Otherwise, I'm sure he would have gotten one at some point. But they technically didn't exist. And Diaz, as we all know, technically correct is the best kind of correct. So we are not going to talk much more about the Yugoslav League because Steve ends up embroiled in an argument with Hajduk management. There are rumors that Steve loves to party. He was dating a pinup model at this point who had appeared in Yugoslavia's version of Playboy. And, he likes to go out discoing and clubbing. He's still always there for games. He doesn't miss any games. But there were rumors that Hajduk wasn't, super thrilled with his outside of soccer lifestyle. So they stopped paying him. He gets in this fight with management over the unpaid wages. And he gets worried that they're actually going to just turn him over to the military to serve his military service. They'll just contact the government and say, yeah, Steve's ready for his military service, so, send him off to the army. So, on December 3rd, 1978, he plays in their last league match before the midseason winter break. They're playing against FK Sarajevo, and he scores twice in a 5-0 win. After this, he asks club management for permission to travel to New York City. His girlfriend, the pinup model, was going to do a photo shoot in New York. He said, I want to go with her. I might play some indoor games while I'm out there, just to stay in shape during the break. And they say, sure. In actuality, through fellow countryman Dragan or Don Popovich, Steve had already agreed a contract with the newly established New York Arrows, the major indoor soccer league. His idea was to defect from Yugoslavia, play a few years in the MISL, and then switch over to quote-unquote real soccer and play in the NASL once, everything had kind of smoothed over.
That is crazy that any European player's highest aspiration at any point was the NASL.
Well, at this point, the NASL was big. This is 78, so selling out 70,000 seat stadiums. Had Pele, you had Beckenbauer. NASL is pretty big, especially if you're coming from Yugoslavia and you're like, I can't defect to Europe. That's not going to work for me, but I can defect to the US and they're not going to, send me back to Yugoslavia. Within weeks, Hajduk realizes he's not coming back, and it becomes the biggest scandal in Yugoslavian sports history. They create a smear campaign against him in all Yugoslav media. They say that he's a traitor to their country, a deserter, and a drunk. They got the Yugoslavian Football Association to work with FIFA to get a ban on Steve taking part in any FIFA-affiliated competitions. And FIFA grants this ban, which blackballs him from competing in any FIFA-affiliated leagues, including the NASL. But MISL, as indoor soccer, is not affiliated with FIFA, so he can still do that. His goal was to do this for a little bit before he could go to the NASL. Didn't expect that it was going to be as big of a deal as it was, but he did still defect from his country, and they were not happy about that. So he plays for the Arrows, and in the first ever MISL season, he finishes second in scoring. He has 43 goals in 18 games, and he is the inaugural league MVP. He then scores 15 goals in 3 playoff games as the Arrows win the first ever MISL title over the Philadelphia Fever. The next season, playing in all 32 games of the regular season, Steve scores 90 goals, 26 more than the person who finished in second place, and he had 46 assists.
Okay, so I know indoor soccer, like I know that there are higher numbers. It's like arena football. It's faster, it's funnier, etc. Where does that remain today? Like today, if I were to look at the Baltimore Blast dynasty that I know existed in indoor soccer, is anyone putting up numbers like close to it? Are there comparable modern day people, or is this like a titanic, unshakable performance?
I mean, like all of Steve's records for single season are still the greatest. Like when he retired, he was number one. I think Tutu of Dallas ended up playing longer and got more career goals, but no one touches Steve's like single season records. This is titanic. There's nothing that really gets even close to Steve. It is like hard to say because arena soccer and indoor soccer has, had a checkered history of starting and stopping with new leagues. So like the records for the MASL are a little different than the MISL, but yeah, even by today's arena soccer standards, Steve's records are still pretty much untouchable on a single season level. Like I said, there are people who have played longer careers than Steve and, compile more, but just single season, it's pretty much unbeatable. But there's still more to come. Again, like I said, he scores 90 goals, 26 more than person in second place, has 46 assists, again wins MVP along with the scoring title and the pass master title. Arrows finished 27-5, which is 7 games ahead of second place Houston. In the playoffs, they win all 3 games they play. They win back-to-back titles. Steve gets playoff MVP as well the first year they're doing that. So now we're at 2 seasons, 2 MVPs, 2 titles. For the 80-81 season, the league expands to 12 teams. This year, the Arrows finished 35-5, which is 10 games ahead of second place St. Louis Steamers. Playing all 40 games, Steve scores 108 goals, which is 57 more than second place Joe Fink of Philly. So it's 108 and then 51. So, there's your context right there.
So there's between second place and a person who scored 0 goals. That is a smaller distance than the distance between second and first place.
That is correct. He's really good at this. Do you want to guess what happens in the playoffs?
Does he win, I guess, what is now the 5th available award called MVP of either regular season or the finals in this league?
Yes. He scores the game-winning goal in the final with 30 seconds to go to beat St. Louis 6-5. So now he's at 3 years, 3 championships, 3 regular season MVPs, 2 playoff MVPs, and that it's only not 3 because they didn't have one the first year. And guess what?
5 years altogether. I'm going to try and hedge you off. Does he do this in 5 straight years?
He does it again next year. Arrows win the title. He leads the league with 103 goals and 60 assists. Another MVP. So now we're at 4-4-4. But something truly shocking happens in the 82-83 season. The Arrows don't win the title. And this happens because they trade Steve to the Golden Bay Earthquakes, who are one of the worst teams in the league halfway through the year. And we're technically an NASL team who were invited to participate that year because the MISL and the NASL were planning a merger with the NASL's indoor league. A lot of people don't remember this, but the NASL technically had 2 leagues, the regular outdoor one with the Soccer Bowl in Pele and Beckenbauer, and their own indoor league that was the second best indoor league, so not going to get a lot of stuff.
Xavier, I love you dearly. No one remembers that.
Exactly. So why would they trade the dude who won 4 MVPs in a row and won them 4 titles in a row? Diaz, any guesses?
I got nothing.
James, any guesses?
Money.
It's partially the money thing. They wanted an American star. They thought it would boost ticket sales if they had an American be their best player. So they traded the foreigner because they wanted an American. They didn't care if he was worse than that guy, but they wanted an American. With this new team, this very bad team, Steve still leads the league in goals, but he does not win MVP this year. So this is the first year that he has not won the MVP. And next year, he wouldn't lead the league in scoring because the merger plans fall through between the NASL and the MISL, and the Earthquakes go back to the NASL, which means the best player in MISL history was essentially traded out of the league inadvertently. And this is bad for the MISL. Still solid for Steve. He's doing well. In the indoor NASL for the 83-84 season, he picks off right where he left off. He scores 63 goals, has 56 assists, wins MVP. So this is now his 5th MVP award, 4 in the MISL, 1 in the NASL Indoor League. And around the same time, it's been 5 years since he defected, and he really does still want to play outdoor soccer. He's pretty open about the fact that he's good at indoor soccer, but outdoor is still his preference. But Hajduk would not drop their support of the ban in any way. They would not take any money to drop the ban or release him from his contract. But eventually, a U.S. Supreme Court ruling about restrictions on employment overrules his FIFA ban, essentially saying, foreign rules can't restrain employment choices in the USA. So he finally gets to play in the outdoor NASL, also for the Earthquakes. So he's playing for their indoor team and their outdoor team at the same time. In the 1983 season, his first outdoor season in 5 years, he gets named to the All-Star team. And then in the 1984 season, he leads the league in scoring with 20 goals and 10 assists in 24 games and gets named the league MVP. So now Steve has been 4-time MVP of the MISL, MVP of the NASL Indoor, and MVP of the NASL Outdoor. He would not get a chance to repeat that, though, because the NASL folds after this season. The Lord of all indoors has had his chance to compete outdoors, proved he's still the best at it, but what is he to do now? He goes back to the MISL, of course. This is, his old stomping grounds. He knows he's already the best there. Earthquakes don't exist anymore, so he can't play for them. And guess what? Neither do the Arrows. They won the first 4 league titles in history, and it still took less than a year and a half for them to dissolve after they traded Steve away. So great work there, getting rid of the best player in the history of indoor soccer and not existing anymore. So instead, he joins up with the San Diego Sockers, who are actually a pretty iconic indoor soccer team. They've existed in pretty much every indoor soccer league throughout American history. There are still San Diego soccer teams currently that are the best in their current MASL leagues. So Steve joins with the Sockers, and he does what Steve does. He leads the league in both goals and assists with a perfectly balanced, so close to perfection tally of 68 each. So close.
Well allowed. It's still very impressive.
The Sockers win the title, and of course, Steve does win MVP. The next year, Steve gets sold halfway through the season to the Tacoma Stars, who were the worst team in the league. But he wins MVP anyway with Tacoma, which was impressive because no one cared about Tacoma. But I do want to talk briefly about the sale because it was made purely for salary cap reasons, and the president of the Tacoma Stars made a very interesting comparison. Quote, "We are ecstatic to bring to Tacoma the best player the game has ever seen. If this were hockey, the Stars just signed Wayne Gretzky. This is the MISL equivalent of Dan Fouts coming to the Seahawks." And I was like, I love Dan Fouts. I love the Air Coryell offense. As Diaz knows, in Mahan's family league, my team name was Air Coryell for about 6 years.
It's not.
That is the nicest comparison anyone has ever made to Dan Fouts.
That's what, like, Dan Fouts is great, but that's what it is.
But I love that was a thought that came across a team owner's head. Like, we just signed the greatest player of all time. This is our Wayne Gretzky. This is our Dan Fouts.
That's some PNW shit.
He plays with Tacoma for a couple of years. He does end up going back to the Sockers, though, like 2 years after that. Wins a couple more titles before he finally does retire after the 89-90 season. According to some players, coaches, and doctors, his hips were just destroyed at this point. Like, doctors had no idea how he could even move. And so they just said, you just have to stop playing. So he does. But in 12 indoor seasons, 11 with the MISL and 1 with the NASL, Steve appears in 455 games and scores 715 goals and adds in 527 assists. He gets named league MVP 7 times, 6 in the MISL and once in the NASL, and wins 7 league titles. In 2 outdoor NASL seasons, despite having not played professional outdoor soccer in 5 years, he plays 46 games, scores 36 goals, has 25 assists, and also wins MVP. So for the purposes of this category, that means he had 8 MVPs split across 3 leagues that no longer exist. Indoor soccer has such an interesting and checkered history. There was a weird period in the 70s and 80s where it was like legitimately popular. Like those couple years where arena football was huge.
It's
Big
like
New York Dragons and Philadelphia Soul.
the early 90s and turn of the millennium swing revival.
Yeah. And I've watched the videos. There's still like some really well documented like games from this time with Steve. And it's fun to watch indoor soccer. And I just like the idea of this guy being the best wherever he played, but wherever he played did not last very long. Every league this man ever played in no longer exists. One of the countries he played in no longer exists. And Diaz, I think that you might enjoy this. Don Popovich had a very AI quote about Steve. And I don't mean the artificial intelligence. I do mean Allen Iverson. Quote, "A lot of people didn't understand him because he liked to go to discos and dance all night long. But nobody prepared himself better for the game than Steve Žungul. He's a game player. He's not a practice player."
How do you say we're talking about practice in Slavic?
You know what? Steve himself might not know because he did not talk about practice. Yeah, I just love the Lord of all indoors. And I like one thing that he said about himself. The goal getter must be a con man, a thief, a clown, a magician. And you must think hard about what you're doing. When the game is over, it's not your body that should be tired, but your brain. And I like that. It's like, no, I just think better than all of you. I can outsmart you, out-trick you, do things that are magic out here. And it worked. It worked. And so that's my guy, the Lord of all indoors, Steve Žungul.
For the record, I'm putting it into Google Translate right now. In Serbian, we're talking about practice is govorimo o praksi.
I'm glad that you rephrased to Serbian and not just Slavic on that.
Just generic, all those people they're the
To say
same,
it in
right?
Slavic is just, we're talking about practice.
Yeah. all those Slavic people, they don't mind being grouped together. There were
Famously.
Famously, yes. Play the song again.
Yeah.
Yugoslavia.
All right. We've got a dynamite trio here. I'll start saying yes, Xavier, you've got the volume guy with Žungul. You've got, again, outliving a country, if not the league there as well. There's a question, the Yugoslav league, like in Serbia, continue into modern day? Does it have antecedents? Or has that one also fully been done away? I'm trying to get the exact number of leagues that he outlived.
So the Yugoslav First League that he played in ended in 92, I believe. The team
no later.
The team that he played for, Hajduk Split, still exists as part of the Croatian League.
Okay.
But it's broken up into each of those constituent republics has their own, has their own league now. So Red Star Belgrade plays in the Serbian League.
Yeah.
Split and Zagreb play in the Croatian League. Sarajevo in the Bosnian League, etc., etc. So they all broke apart. I don't think any one league has like the continuation or the successor.
But it has the teams continuing through. So
yes, the teams are but they're in different leagues now. They're all in different leagues.
And even if we call that a push, there's no MVP from that. And he's got 3 more to choose from in which he wins. So you've got the volume. But to Billy Cunningham, we've got a teammate of Wally Jones. We've got a rival of Louis Dampier. We've got the coach of Daryl Dawkins. We have such a rich addition to the RTGCU.
If I can add 2 more to those accolades.
Please, yes, please.
We also have a great nickname, the Kangaroo Kid.
A fucking enormously good nickname.
And we also have the second to last player to wear a jersey number because he did allow Charles Barkley to wear 32 after Magic Johnson's HIV diagnosis.
Okay. And then, I think I've made my feelings about Gene Faut very clear, and I do think it's frustrating because, like, if we were to look at the relative extinctness of the leagues, the ABA is also kind of interesting because some of the teams, like the teams of the Yugoslav League, live on and have been like subsumed into the larger product. And after all, his time with the ABA is so brief. But I agree. I do love your point that I think that makes him an ABA guy. I love Billy Cunningham. With Steve Žungul, the Yugoslav League cannot exist anymore. But there are still arena and indoor leagues that have kept some of those similar franchises like the San Diego Sockers on. And in theory, you could have a women's professional baseball league come at any point. One would kind of... It's surprising that that's the one that hasn't come back in any capacity whatsoever. Maybe not surprising. Disappointing is maybe the better word.
I would be shocked if there is not a venture capitalist who has reached out to Monet Davis and said, do you want to be the face of a league? I would be shocked if that conversation hasn't happened. If
I'm not mistaken, there are attempts at softball, I think, right now. And that's understandable because that's what people will have played up to that point. So, I get that is the target, but there has not been a women's professional baseball league. You can argue, again, these rules were different, that there has never been a women's professional baseball league. What I guess I'm trying to say is it's the most extinct of the league that she served as an MVP for. I guess that's my case, but all 3 of these, absolutely excellent.
James, I pulled up some career stats for you for comparison across the MISL and the current MASL, just because you asked about it. So for the MISL, which was 78 to 92, the career points leader is Steve with 1,123. Second is Branko Segota at 841. Steve also has 190 more goals than anyone else with 652 and 90 more assists than anyone else with 471. If we switch to the MASL, which has been around a little longer at this point, the career goals leader is Frank Tayu, who has 403 goals in about the same amount of games that Steve played for the MISL. Scoring is about the same in both leagues, so there's not any depression for it. He also won 4 MVPs in a row, and in his first 150 games where Steve had scored 450 goals, Frank scored 323. So even the guy who is the greatest of the history of the MASL still has scored much less than Steve, and also did not have the same assist numbers whatsoever. So like Gretzky, where he had the goals and assists, his goals by themselves are still better than the greatest ever goal scorer for every other indoor soccer league.
You've convinced me that this person that wanted to play outdoor soccer forever and never even really wanted to be in an indoor soccer league is the greatest indoor soccer player by default because he was just stuck there. You've fully convinced me of that. No, I could lean anyway. Does someone feel really strongly? I really am quite torn between all three.
Would it sway you if I told you that his nickname was Disco Steve?
It doesn't hurt. It definitely doesn't hurt that he's Disco Steve. It hurts a little bit that he has to go by Steve the whole time, though I'll admit I can't remember how to pronounce his first name properly. Diaz, do you want to try and pull me to Billy Cunningham, or are we kind of leaning towards Žungul?
Well, a question came to mind for me. Because with Steve Žungul being the Disco King, or the Disco, what did they call him? The Disco
Steve.
Disco Steve.
Disco Steve. Just Disco Steve.
He claims no monarchy. He's merely Disco Steve.
Do we think Disco Steve...
One of all indoors might be some monarchy, though. Just not a disco monarchy.
Do we think he ever partied with Carlos Kaiser?
It's certainly possible. It is honestly possible.
Carlos Kaiser did have his brief foray into indoor soccer in America.
Apparently, Steve was he partied with all the celebrities when he was with the Arrows. He drove a Rolls Royce to the disco and wore a cowboy hat and big cowboy boots. So we have this Yugoslavian man who speaks broken English showing up in a Rolls Royce and cowboy attire to disco with celebrities and then go score 15 goals the next morning.
Yeah, I mean, Steve Žungul is delightful. I guess if I was going to say anything for Billy Cunningham, I would just reference the incredible crossover with so many other guys and categories that we've done before. And just the big disconnect between his impact on the Sixers franchise and the reverence with which he is approached by a modern day fan of the Sixers. Like, I'm in a Sixers chat right now, and I feel like if I just set a poll, like, honestly, I'll make it anonymous. Have you heard of Billy Cunningham? There's like 20 people in this group. I bet you at least 5 have not heard of Billy Cunningham. And that's a disgrace.
What does it say about your franchise that the most successful coach in your history, and in many ways in like NBA history for a long time, just willingly left after 8 years to never pursue professional basketball again?
It's such an incredible what if. Because like I said, he retired in 85 at 42 years old. He could have been our Jerry Sloan. He could have been our Popovich. Like, he could have just been the coach.
This is what I do now. I just am the Philadelphia 76ers head coach.
And how much better it would have turned out for us if he had done that. But
I can confirm to you that they did play indoor soccer in America during the same season. I don't know if that means they met, but
absolutely means that they met.
During 89-90, they both played indoor soccer in America. Although Carlos
I don't want to live in a world
actually play any games.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I refuse to live in a world where this man who never went to practice and this man who just simply didn't play at all did not at some point party if they were here in the same year.
They had to have. So it is canon of our universe. Carlos Kaiser and Steve Žungul, they had no words that they communicate to each other, but they did have drinks and their love of music and partying. So that's canon to me. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I said at the jump, like really the Billy Cunningham research was just a vehicle for me to like reminisce on a time before I was born, but like when the Sixers were good and like, you know, proof that it happens and a person who was really important in that. So I'm not going to beat the drum super hard for him. And I am honestly like, I like Disco Steve. I really do.
Disco Steve and Carlos Kaiser in the same season together. Now that we know this, it kind of feels like kismet. I'm Billy Cunningham's going to stick with me. Gene Faut, love you. But I think it's Steve Žungul this time.
Gene Faut, ahead of her time, perhaps too good for her time. And Billy Cunningham, perhaps too good for the city of Philadelphia. But there's one guy who dominated everywhere that he went. You know, we have but mere MVPs of one league when it comes to those first two. But when it comes to Disco Steve Žungul, we're talking about a multiple-time MVP of multiple leagues. If the Yugoslav League had an MVP, we know what it would be called. It would be called the Steve Žungul Award. And when it comes to this week of RTG, there is also one thing that is clear, and it is that welcome to the Žungul. We like fun and games, and Steve Žungul is the latest inductee into our hall.
I've got Jungle Fever, baby.
You know that there was some fan, like super fan, that had that on a sign.
That's the New York Post headline while he's with the Arrows.
Jungle Fever.
Yeah. No, I love it. That was great. These are three great guys. Hopefully this was one good episode for you all, but it would not have been able to exist without the help of producer Craig and all the coders behind him, or without our musical director, Don Ham, for that lovely theme music. But truly, thank you for listening in for this last year, which we will celebrate next with the Guy of the Year Awards. Hopefully, those of you who don't have a RTG Plus subscription, you'll still get to tune into a little bit at the end of the broadcast, I think. In the meantime, if you want to keep up with us at the end of this year or going into next year, you can find everything about the show and everything about what we say and write and do and think at bit.ly/remember that guy, all one word, all lowercase. We do have something that I'm incredibly excited for next year. And I know that I said the last year, it's been the same thing all three times, but it's actually coming this time. So we look forward to bringing that in with you. And of course, look forward to seeing you at the Goaties next week. But until then, I've been one of your hosts, James.
I've been the very special guest, Xavier.
And I'm Diaz. And while we have that RTG Plus sneak peek coming for you, don't forget, we're also very excited. Netflix Season 2 of Squid Game coming out. And we are very excited to see the fate of the protagonist, Guy Hunt.
Arsenal versus Newcastle. Care about Cup just got drawn. So two-legged semi.
Damn, yo.
Who's home first? That's actually.
I think you guys are home first.
Fuck.
Wait,
I think you need to be in front of the Toon Army for the second leg.
No. We're home first, so you get Newcastle at home second leg.
All we need, we need 0-0 at the Emirates. That's all we need. Give me a tie at Emirates and bring it to fucking St. James, baby. That's all we need.
I'm delighted by this.